So on this occasion, the room is playing into the feel that we're looking for. Also really interesting to hear the extended low end and the lack of kind of detail focus that we get from that greater balance of room space from the figure of 8 pickup that we get with the Coles. Hi everyone, welcome back to Greenroom's 1. So now we're going to focus in a bit more detail onto the first track that we recorded, which is a cover of John Mayer's Gravity from his Continuum album. So we just went into the studio with the aim of recording a cover of this track, and the things that we wanted to do were, one, the nature of this particular track is there's lots of room in it. It's quite a slow 6/8 blues sort of vibe, so it gives room to allow the space of the room to breathe. So we wanted to capture the room to its maximum. So in terms of the baffling around the drum kit, you'll see in the footage that the baffles are sort of all the way back in the room, so we're maximising the amount of room space that we have in our sound. And we wanted to have a number of different microphones so that, again, you can hear the differences between these choices, some of which are quite dramatic and some of which are quite subtle, depending on which microphone we're looking at. So we started off with our close mics, and we've got close mics on these drums. Actually, in all of the tracks that we've recorded, we've got a similar setup in terms of the close mics. We've actually got 3 microphones inside the kick drum from the collection of microphones that we have here in the studios. There's an RE20, a Sennheiser 41, and of course an AKG D112, one of the classic kick drum mics that we placed inside the kick drum, and they're all very close together. Again, you'll see in the footage that's playing alongside this the positioning of those microphones on there. And we also had a Neumann U89 outside the kick drum, which actually on reflection was a little too close to the kick. Didn't necessarily get a chance to breathe. If you think about the wavelength of a low frequency sound wave coming out of a kick drum, actually you really want to be a little bit further away from the kick to allow yourself to get that full impact of the low end from the kick. So this one was a little bit close on this particular recording. So we've got those microphones there that we can have a listen to. When you listen to these microphones, I would encourage you to think about a few different criteria with which to listen. And again, you've always got to be thinking about what you're trying to achieve. It's not that one of the microphones sounds good and another one sounds bad. It's that one is going to be more appropriate for the record that you're looking to make. And the things that I often listen to when I'm picking a microphone and placing my microphone is I'm looking for the transient response. So how much detail, how much speed do I get in the transient? Do I get a more rounded kind of transient, a fatter sound if you like, or do I get a much faster, snappier kind of a sound? I'm also listening for the tonality of the instrument that I'm recording. You know, what's the frequency balance? Do I have lots of low end, lots of top end, a balance of the two, uneven, that kind of thing? And then I'm also looking for the overall picture I'm painting of my instrument. So does it make it sound like a big drum or a small drum or a big kit, a drum kit if I'm looking at overheads? What's the image that I get if I'm recording an orchestra? You know, do I fill my stereo spread with an even coverage across the speakers in a room like this? You know, they're the kind of things I'm thinking about. So I'm thinking about what's the picture I'm painting, because again, our listener will also paint a picture. And we're drawing a cartoon, I think, in our listener's head of what we want our instrument to sound like and what we want the player to be perceived as being, laid back and grooving or hit really hard on the drums. These are the kind of pictures that we're painting with our mics and the kind of pictures that we're painting here. Now, the RE20, the 41 and the D112 are all dynamic microphones. So we would expect them all to do well at handling low end, at handling the sheer SPL, the sheer level inside the kick drum. But actually they're all dramatically different. And again, I encourage you when you listen to these microphones on the session, think about EQ. Because again, when we put a mic on a kick drum, we're not always thinking about the natural sound that we're getting straight off the mic. We're also thinking about potentially processing it to add low end. Because again, you'll often find you don't get the low end you're expecting on these microphones. And again, particularly mics like the 41, the RE20, that have a slightly more natural sort of response, tend to take EQ very, very well. The D112s and other microphones of that nature, or some of the Audix mics that have, you know, quite strong characteristic tonal balances, they tend to be perhaps less easy to manipulate, but give a more straight out of the box kind of sound. So have a listen to that when you listen through to these microphones. The U89 that's on the outside, we're going to expect not just some low end from it, but also some kind of natural air, but also bleed. We know we're going to get bleed, and that may or may not be a problem. And when you look at the session, and we do a bit of listening in a moment, you'll see that there is a gate on the kick out. That's not being triggered by the kick out microphone, it's actually being triggered by one of the kick in microphones. So when the kick in hits, it triggers the gate on the kick out mic to give us tighter control, because the bleed is louder in that second microphone. So we're able to really focus what we're listening on. And we'll have a little listen to those in a moment. I'll go through the different mics first and the positions, and then we'll have a listen to some of them. The second set of microphones, and again they're color coded in this particular session, the snares. We've got 3 microphones on the snare, 1 underneath and 2 on top. And again, I've gone for 2 on top because I actually think realistically you're probably making a choice between 2 sort of sounds on a snare drum. I would describe it as being, do you want to feel your snare is sort of punching you in the face or slapping you, so punching you in the stomach or slapping you in the face. And we've got an SM57 from Shure, which to me has more of that kind of punch to it. Again, a dynamic microphone, it's not as quick as a condenser. So we get that kind of round and more held in punch sort of feel from the snare. With perhaps less detail, less air, it will also, I think, will lead our snare to sound shorter. I think it'll sound more like a block of sound. We'll get a listen in a moment. It'll be great to hear those 2. The KM184 to me is more of a slap to the face. If you go for like an AKG microphone, I find that the small diaphragm AKG is even faster and snappier sounding. This 184 has a little bit more balance to it than those, but again, fantastic microphone. And again, you'll hear the difference. And then we have a mic underneath, SM57. It's been phase reversed because again, we want, when a snare drum is hit, both skins move together. So when we move away from our top mic, we move towards our bottom mic. So we're going to get phase cancellation because we've got those waveforms moving in opposite directions. So by phase flipping, we create effectively the diaphragms moving in the same direction at the same time, and we don't get that signal loss through that comb filtering that we get should we not do that. So that's the 3 mics that we've got on the snare. And again, we've gone very similar on the toms. The same kind of idea, this idea of a condenser microphone for speed and detail. And actually for a really natural blooming sort of low end on a tom. And then we've gone for a dynamic microphone to give us that more sort of classic rock sound, if you like, where it really glues together the transient and the sustain of the tom and gives us more of that kind of a thud rather than a t, more of a th kind of sound. To me anyway, that's the kind of feel I get from it. I hear a 41, a Sennheiser 41 on a tom, and to me it just sounds like rock music, probably because most of the classic rock records that I've grown up listening to have that kind of a sound. For me, the 414 is a more natural, open sounding thing, which can be fantastic if you want detail and speed, but also if you want the instrument to breathe a little bit more. So again, there's lots of reasons to make these choices, and you can hear these in the tom fills. We won't listen to these in this particular video, something you can go and listen to in your own time, but there are tom fills within the track that you can hear. We then get to the sort of more specialist bit of this session. This framework of mics that we've got here are very similar on the other sessions that we're going to be looking at, the other songs. But we actually get to our overheads, which in this case they're labelled in a very sort of pink colour. And on this occasion they're all C414s with the exception of the middle of our mid and side pair for one of the overheads, where we've got a little Calrec Hebden sound microphone. So we've got the 2 414s in a sort of modified recorder man position, which again you'll see on the video. And the idea there is with those overheads, they're placed the same distance from the snare. One of the overheads tends to be sort of over the drummer, pointing at the snare hi-hat side of things and looking to capture really good rack tom. And then the second second microphone is more over the floor tom. Again, the same distance from the snare, and again looking to achieve that sound. Now, if you look at the recorder man technique, you will see actually that it retains the same distance from the kick and the snare. So the snare will both be the same to the mic, the kick will be the same to the mic. Kick and snare will be different distances, very difficult to achieve the same for both, but it means we're getting in phase arrival. We're getting the same arrival time for kick drum into both mics, same arrival for snare. We haven't done that, we've just focused on the snare, but we should hear a really good strong snare. And I find one of the characteristics of this overhead position is I get amazing, beautiful sounding detailed cymbals, great natural width without sounding separated, but we get a super solid snare, almost to the point sometimes where we don't even need that close mic. Really strong tom sound, so again, sometimes don't need those toms. And the key here is how high you place them. Again, if you look classic recorder man, it will give you a distance. Again, Glyn Johns will give you a distance, and I actually think you need to respond to your space. What sounds good in your room? I think a lot of drum recordings are ruined by early reflection energy back from the roof. So if you've got a low ceiling, you can't go high with your overheads. You're going to get nasty cone filtering into your cymbals. We have nice high ceilings here. But again, we wanted quite a sort of tight focus sound, so they're relatively close, as you'll see in the video. The second pair of overheads that we'll be looking at is a middle and side pair. Again, I'm not going to do too much detail here because we've got a separate video looking at those in more detail. The third pair is a coincident XY pair, which are basically placed like that over the drum kit with 414s. And again, very, very similar distance to the other microphones in the array. We wanted to try and keep relatively similar distance to get that kind of attempt to try and maintain a similar sort of balance of space. And the last pair are what I've called room heads, which is a pair of 414s but slightly further back from the kit. Again, trying to embrace the size of that, and I'm hoping to get some more low end from that. We'll listen to those separately. In addition to those overheads, there's also a pair of mono overheads. I think it's very easy to forget the power of mono. You get some fantastic drum sounds from those mono recordings. And again, if you're looking at something like that Recorder Man, or even some kind of near coincident or spaced pair of microphones, if you know that they're all the same distance from the snare, you can also place your mono mic the same distance if you know you want to achieve that kind of mono compatibility. And again, we have tools in the studios here, like Auto Align from Sound Radix, available in some of the studios, that allows you to make decisions in post-production around bringing things into phase, into time, I should say, more accurately than it's not doing phase rotation. It's looking for the best possible phase fit and then doing a time movement according to match that. So we've got two mono overheads. We've got a Neumann M147, which is a tube condenser microphone, fantastic microphone, fixed pattern cardioid, quite a wide cardioid from what I'm hearing. And then the second option is the classic Coles ribbon mic that we've got as a mono overhead, which again, actually in this particular recording, demonstrates a really stunning, like shuffly low end with loads of energy in it. Really, really nice. There's then some room mics. There's a Coles ribbon and a U89 set to figure of 8. So again, we've got two figure of 8 room mics there, one ribbon, one condenser. So again, you can listen to those and get a sense of, what does that choice afford me? That's what you need to be thinking about. You need to be thinking about not which is best, a ribbon or a condenser, but actually, what does the ribbon do? What does the condenser do? What does the way that it's built? What are the electronics within it? What do they provide me with that's going to be right for my record? Because the right choice for one record might be the wrong choice for another. We might learn from that wrong choice. That wrong choice might inspire us for the next session going, oh, actually, the sound I got the other day that I didn't want is perfect now. So again, it's really about delving into those sounds and looking at what we call the affordances of these tools. So what impact they give to us, and then what impact it has on our record. And then, as well as those two room mics, we've got one of Mark's favourites, which is a mic in the corridor, just out the back. It's a DPA on this particular occasion, an omnidirectional DPA, and it's a fantastic sound. It might not be usable on your record, and again on this particular occasion, I've done a bit of work with a gate so that the snare mic, the close snare mic, is triggering the gate on the corridor. Because actually, I found that the corridor mic was making the kick drum sound messy. And it wasn't a desirable length that we were getting that we might achieve with some reverb, but it's really nice on the snare. It gives a really nice sandy quality, a bit grotty, but really, really nice for the kind of record sound that we're looking at. So again, we've got that gate in there to look at. So that was the microphones all physically placed. So all the microphones were put up, and then our drummer came in and started playing. And we can have a quick look at some of the microphone choices that we've made here around kick drum, etc. So the first kick mic that I'm going to play here, this is our RE20. Now the keen eared amongst you will notice there was also a snare mic open there as well. So I'm going to mute that close snare mic, and I'm going to mute the overheads. And we're going to focus just on our kick drum for a second, which is an odd thing to do in some ways, because our listener doesn't hear the kick in isolation, so arguably why should we? But I think it's a good thing for us to hear what this mic is contributing. So again, we've got a bit of bleed, but relatively low level of bleed that's quite well isolated from the dry mic. Lots of punch. So again, what I'm hearing here is lots of concentrated punch. Not a huge amount of low end, but from an RE20, I can add that afterwards. Let's compare that with, say, the 41. So we start with our RE20. There's the RE20 again, and then the 41. immediately it's much clearer that that 41 has a much more focused transient. But it's more of a pa-pa, sounds much more pa-pa, whereas the RE20 is more ba-ba. To me, it's like a different kind of thing. And actually, when I listen to this particular record, that pa-pa from the 41, I think is going to be too aggressive. I want a softer, rounder sound. So the RE20 might be more appropriate in this case, but on another occasion, another mic might be more appropriate. We've also got the D112. Let's have a quick listen to that. And I'll put that against the 41. So with the D112, I've got more of that low end in there, but I've also got this slight hint of like basketball bouncing mid-range, which is not something I've ever found desperately attractive in a D112. Great on a rock record, but for me, again, it's just a bit too coloured, a bit too much coloration in the mid-range, a bit too much low end. So I would probably be looking at the RE20 as my mic of focus on this particular occasion, but I would be looking to EQ it, and I would recommend that you do the same. Just for information, here's our kick-out microphone. It's a little bit messier in its sound. But there is a sense of air movement. There is a sense of low-end air movement. It needs some EQ work. It also needs tightening up. So I'm now going to engage the gate on this particular microphone. And the gate is triggered off the RE20 within there. So we're using the RE20 to trigger the gate. So every time that the RE20 hits, the gate opens on the U89, which would help us remove the snare, which is quite loud in the bleed. So here's it ungated. And we'll just try popping a gate on there. And that combines quite nicely with our kick-in. So that's the kind of thing you can do when you're listening to these sessions to get a feel for it. We haven't tried multiple positions in the kick drum. That's something that perhaps we'll look at in another session, and actually something you can experiment with in moving the mic backwards and forwards in the kick drum. You get quite vastly different sounds by moving that mic, and I think too often we throw a mic in there and just hope it's going to sound good. So it's really important to spend some time on that. Let's very briefly have a quick look at the snare mics that we've got, the 57 and the 184. I think this is one of the most interesting ones, and probably the one that we'll have another look at now. The other mics that we'll have a look at, we'll have a brief listen to the room mics for interest, and the overheads we're going to focus on in another session. So here we are. So I'm going to mute our kick drum mics for now, because we don't need those for now. So let's now just hear the SM57. You know, everyone's sort of go-to choice, I think, on the snare drum. And again, I think it's worth noting this. We specifically chose the snare drums for the tracks that we were working on. This was a sort of wooden hooped drum, and we spent some time tuning it to try and get some length into the snare, so that we have that the kind of length to it to feel it breathing. It's a 6/8 track that needs to feel like boom. It's that kind of rotational bounce backwards and forwards that you get with this. So if you don't have the length in the snare, you can't get that sort of musical bounce. And I think with this SM57. Sorry, I should not talk over it. This SM57, it has tons of that classic stomach punch that we expect from a 57, but it feels like it's like a block of noise almost, I think, with this. It's a really nice tone, but it doesn't necessarily have the length that we want. There's not that much detail in the hit as well. It's like it's sort of compressed a bit in its sort of sound shape that we get from that kind of microphone. So let's try the 184. Actually, the first thing I notice is, hi-hats. So we're now, because we've got that increased sensitivity from the microphone, slightly wider pickup pattern, slightly less strong rejection, and we're picking up more of the hi-hat on the 184. But to me, immediately it feels more open. I feel like I'm hearing the whole instrument. I'm hearing the stick hit the snare, the energy move across the snare into the wood, and then come out and create that kind of classic envelope that we think about when we talk about musical notes, both from the synthesis perspective and also from a kind of a drum perspective. We have this natural envelope to sounds. All instruments, violins, pianos, they all have very distinct envelopes, and we really hear the envelope on the snare. and we hear that. And if we combine that with the kick in, we've got that sense of sway. I shall swap to the F57. Now, I love the sound of that snare on a 57, but to me it sounds more like a drum machine. It's got much more of a drum machine quality to it, which is a brilliant sound, and I love the sound. But for this record, I would be choosing the 184, I suspect, on this occasion. We could try a combination of the two. Again, they're very close to each other, so they would work well together. And if we wanted to add a bit more detail from the underside of the snare, I can introduce a bit of the snare under. And it would be a musical decision as to whether you wanted to gate that. Because actually we hear the underside of the snare being triggered by the kick drum, but actually that's quite nice. It's quite a nice sound, and it's up to you whether that's the right sound for the record. Just very, very briefly, I will just show you what we've got with our mono overhead microphones here. So I'm going to actually we'll mute, just so you really hear them clearly. We'll mute those other microphones. Some of you sort of with more keen vision may also notice there's some trim plugins on my kick and snare microphones. This is to manipulate phase relationships, to give me the very best relationships with my overheads. I haven't actually looked at the phase relationships on the with the room mics yet, so but we'll just focus on hearing them on their own with our mono overheads and our room mics. The first one is our M147. And again, when you see the footage, you'll see those mono overheads were probably 2.5 meters high, something like that. That kind of something in that region. And that's a cardioid microphone, so there's no pickup from behind it, and yet still we've got a very, very roomy sound, so we can hear the impact of the room on our capture. So we need to think about the pickup pattern of our microphone and what balance we want between that wet sound and that dry sound. I think again, sort of room mics are sort of quite a cool thing to talk about in recording, but they don't always give us what we want towards our record. Sometimes actually we want to try as dry sound as possible and control our room. We know we've got fantastic tools here, Universal Audio, etc. Reverb tools for really shaping the sound of our drum rooms if the room is not the sound that we're after. And I'm going to flip to the Coles ribbon. So we've got the 147. And immediately, it feels very 6/8 to me. It's really got that sense of timing that I'm looking for. So on this occasion, the room is playing into the feel that we're looking for. Also really interesting to hear the extended low end and the lack of kind of detail focus that we get from that greater balance of room space from the figure of 8 pickup that we get with the Coles. So we're hearing, it's almost like the mic is further away because we've got pickup from the back. And again, there's lots of online resources. DPA have a fantastic resource where it will show you the impact of polar pattern on the perceived proximity to our source. So by going with the figure of 8, it sounds further away, it's created more of a balance, but also it's really lovely low end in that particular point in the room. The last set of mics that we've got are some room mics and the corridor mic. So we've got a room mic here, which is again a Coles ribbon as a room mic. Now actually we've got quite a trashy mid-range on that one, which comes from, I think, from the nature of the room. It has a sort of quite a nice kind of trashy tone to it, which can be fantastic on a record. This is one where I'd be tempted to gate it off the kick drum, because I love the way the low end breathes in the room. Again, it's all about the position in the room. And someone might say, where did you put that mic? And well, we put that mic where we heard all the low end. Because if we're hearing low end, the mic will hear the low end too. So it was placed to try and capture some low end from that kick drum, and it really succeeds in that. And we'll try the U89 now, which is again a cardioid microphone, so we're expecting it to sound a bit more focused, but also I'm expecting a change in tonality from the speed and detail that we get. So that's the Coles, and now the ribbon, the condenser. And it's just a completely different feel completely different feel. I mean, you can draw comparisons, absolutely, but it's amazing how two mics basically in the same spot sound so very, very different based on the electronics within the microphones, the polar patterns, the speed, because again with that condenser we're picking up all that detail, and again much more focus on the drum there, I think. But you hear the distance, and again you could move that much closer if you wanted less of that distance and more of that dry sound. This is not a how to record, it's a how to listen to the process of recording so that you can get where you need to get with your sound. And finally, the good fun mic, we've got the corridor microphone, which is just fantastic. And again, I can filter it so that only the snare is being triggered. So it's now like a noise reverb, and if I put that in with my close snare, add some overheads just for context, then dial that back a bit. We've got a very relaxed, very roomy sort of tone from our recording, and that's basically what this session's all about. Have a look at yourselves at the mics on the toms, get a bit more detailed with the snares, etc., the kicks, see what you think, and then try some of these ideas out on your own session. Try some of these positions, try some other positions. You know, it's a real opportunity, I think, to really explore recording and to think scientifically about it. Think scientifically about the nature of your tool, the nature of your space, what you're trying to achieve, because that's what this is. It's a transfer function. We've got the sound we've got, the sound we need, and the tool that transfers us from the sound we've got to the sound we need is the space and the microphones and our performer in the studio. Hopefully this is some ideas, and I look forward to a bit more focus on the overheads in the next video session.